paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
Entitled. You want answers.
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Nick Bryant podcast. Today, my guest is John Brisson. He's an investigative journalist who discusses various topics through his SubStack and Odysee channel, which is called We've Read the Documents. John is one of the modern lead investigators covering the Finders operation and the Council for National Policy. He writes about parapolitics, health, and conspiracy viewed from a Christian perspective. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing well, Mr. Bryant. It's an honor to definitely be speaking with you on your podcast. One of the reasons why I investigated the Finders in the first place, because I read the first chapter of your excellent book, The Franklin Scandal, and in doing so, later, finding some interesting connections to Patch Adams, and we'll talk about when I was just researching the Finders aside, is what led me to actually been investigating them for the past odd 5-6 years or so. So I want to thank you for all the work that you have done, with your, writing and podcasts and interviews on Epstein, on the Franklin scandal, and the information that you've brought forth, sir, over the many, 2 decades. And I look up to you very much. And the reason why I'm here and the reason why I've done this research is because of the work that you've done.
You can just call me Nick. Mr. Bryant sounds too exalted.
Okay, Nick. Yes, sir.
So I had Elizabeth Voss on, and she had written a series of articles on the Finders, and YouTube plucked them from the cybersphere and deposited them in the black hole where things get deposited. And I was kind of upset about that because there wasn't any profanity with that. There wasn't anything sexually explicit. So I called her up and I said, I'd like to do another segment on the Finders since YouTube pulled our original segment. And she said that she was busy, but she directed me towards you. And then I read a lot of the stuff that you had written about the Finders, and you've done background research that no one has done. So I was really impressed by that.
Thank you, Nick. And
Marion Petty is the alpha and the omega of the Finders. Could you tell us about him?
Yeah, so Marion Petty, he's a very interesting character. And as far as how much of his life is true or not, like I said, is he a spook or is he a kook? And that was one of the reasons why I was so interested in understanding the Finders operation, because of the mystery that surrounded Marion Petty and the mystery that surrounded the Finders. And so Marion, he is very much a character that's hard to pin down as far as the mythos of his life, of what is true and what is not true. But what I was able to uncover trying to prove this mysterious investigative leads memo, which I have the full copy of it too as well, the extended copy of the investigative leads memo, was about the former, life of Marion David Petty, about him being, within the United States Army Air Corps before it became the Air Force, and how, he became an intelligence officer for the United States Central Intelligence Agency to co-opt the counterculture movement in the United States of America through the Finders, which I termed the Finders operation because it seemed to be a government, United States government operation to me through all my research that I had done on it. And Petty had numerous connections that would put him as such. One of the biggest being that he was a chauffeur, both him and his brother, who later became a detective who was tragically killed, Clinton Petty. they were chauffeurs to major bigwig generals and future presidents, including Dwight D. Eisenhower, where, you know, Petty talks about getting a lot of information through, you know, driving Patton, George S. Patton, Dwight D. Eisenhower around, because when you're a chauffeur, you're intimate with whom you drive around on a frequent basis, right? You start having conversations even with heads of state and with, you know, leaders as you're driving them around. As you see them, you overhear information, and that's where, you know, I believe that, you know, they started, you know, if they trusted Petty was that such of a job early in his U.S. Army Air Corps career, then later it was about almost, you know, after he so-called supposedly got out of the military during the 1950s, that he received intelligence training at the Jesuit Georgetown University. And, you know, and so again, in my opinion, Marion D. Petty was a United States intelligence military asset that would later go on to found the Finders operation in the 60s and the 70s and recruit various people, where he would keep domiciles even early within his U.S. Air Corps career, you know, during the 1930s, where he would have apartments. He would use them. He talked about, he actually discussed this in the interview with Ken Thomas and Lynn Bracken, that he would have kind of like these apartments where people of various intelligence communities, at that time it would be the OSS instead of the CIA, would come through and stay very cheaply at his domiciles that he would rent to them, and then they would leave. So people would always come and go, and you see that with the Finders too as well, that people would always constantly, you have your core members of the operation, but people would always come and go as they pleased. And the Finders themselves too as well would go out and gather information, and they would, you know, distribute whatever information that they needed, that they were told to by intelligence agencies, through various publications like the Futurists, part of the World Future Society, and among others. So, you know, the Finders, you know, Marion Petty of himself, you know, he was a world traveler. He would travel the entire world, as we saw in the Washington Metropolitan Department disclosures, the Chronicle timeline, that he had passport stamps during the 1950s to the 1980s for the USSR, North Korea, and China. So how did he get into those countries without being some sort of United States intelligence asset of the highest orders? How did he get inside North Korea? How did he get inside during the USSR so easily during the Cold War? How did Toby Terrell, a member of the Fighters, just travel across the world through China and through the USSR? I haven't written about it yet, but I will. Just so nonchalantly just go into these countries that we were supposedly antagonistic with. You know, I mean, these people were intelligence agents that worked for the United States government. It's clear as day. So Marion Petty, though he was given orders, he was very much a chaos agent, a game caller, as you will. So he would be allowed within boundaries to run operations himself, I would assume, too, as well. And so, I mean, Marion Petty definitely, you know, definitely a spook. He's also probably a kook, too.
So Charles Marsh was Petty's mentor.
Yes.
And Marsh has a very interesting history of befriending Colonel Edward House, who essentially ran the administration of Wilson when Wilson had a number of strokes. So tell us about Charles Marsh.
Well, one thing, okay, so Petty met Charles Marsh through Joseph Chang, who was a Jesuit trained intelligence agent who was a reporter. And they would meet at the National Press Club, which Petty has a sordid history through the National Press Club of working through it, as well as one of the Finders members, I can't remember offhand, he actually wrote a book called Bureau of Spies, which I could look it up, about the National Press Club, but never disclosed anything about this involvement of the finders. Never, any involvement of the finders developing the National Press Club website in the 1990s, or Petty being a major involvement in the National Press Club. You think you're going to write a book about spies within the National Press Club, but you're gonna leave out the finders. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to me.